Hey everyone, Pastor Andy here, and I'm glad to be back with you for the 12th episode of our exploration of the question, who do you say that I am? The question Jesus asked his disciples, and the question that it is our life's journey to answer as well. And there are so many answers, not only the ones that the disciples gave or the ultimate one that Peter gave, but the ones that Scripture show us in a variety of ways. And I've been focusing primarily on the Gospels, and we're going to end, in fact, at the end of this in several more sessions with the Gospels. You could go past that time into the perspectives of the early church through the centuries, and even up to this day, there continue to be new ways of seeing Jesus. And some of them very valid, and some of them perhaps not so much. But we're sticking with the ones that we can clearly pull out of gospel material primarily. And today we're looking at Jesus I'm going to double up and talk about him partially as a mystic and then also as a sage. I like both these words, but they're not maybe the most typical. A mystic is someone who experiences God in such a powerful way that it changes their lives, and they become essentially in tune with God in a way that you can sense, that you can experience, and that really informs the rest of their life. Naturally, we all have had some contact by the grace of God with the supernatural. It may be an experience here or there, or just receiving communion on a Sunday morning. Not all of us end up being cut out to be mystics who spend the rest of our lives in that zone. But certainly throughout history, there have been many who could be equated. And indeed, a Buddha or a Muhammad might also be considered mystics. And certainly over the Christian history, there's been many who would be considered mystics. But we're going to look at how Jesus could be seen that way. And of course, also then we'll move on to how it could be seen as a sage. I'll get to that in a moment. Moderns might be a little suspicious. As we talked about miracles last week, moderns also might be a little bit suspicious of mysticism. Again, the Enlightenment brought this sort of scientific worldview into our philosophy, and most of us are somewhat influenced by it. Some of religion embraced it and found ways to work within it, and others provided a complete reactionary response to it. Really, today our Christian church could be seen in some ways as divided along the lines of whether one is comfortable with some of the modern suppositions of science and other things versus the conservative or reactionary thoughts against the impact of a modern worldview on the old story. You may fall very firmly in one camp or another. I hope that this is helpful for you as we go through it. What I would say is that even those who are modern and maybe a little bit leery of people claiming visions, people claiming miraculous experiences of being transported, of going to another time, of a type of bliss that is inexpressible, the mystical experiences. Even moderns, I think, understand that there are times we, of course, get transcended beyond our normal experience. They'll be beyond our normal daily life. There's an inkling of something more, and what that might be might for moderns be less mystical than neurological, or just a happy day. But for others of us, we can accept that there might be a communion with something beyond us, and in our case as Christians, something new. Moderns can tend to label this as New Agey thinking, navel gazing. Certainly there's room in mysticism for hoaxes, for people making claims. There's people with delusional medical conditions that might claim to have mystical experiences, but it's nevertheless common, and we look at saints like St. Paul, Peter, Francis, and even Mother Teresa as people that I think gave testimony to the mystical worldview. Mystical experiences of Jesus are seen here and there in the gospel. It's not the predominant, but it's a stream that one cannot deny. When did he start to have these mystical experiences? Some very little information for us about that. Was it somewhere around the time that he was in the temple at 12, where it came to him that he knew things beyond his age, and that was a relationship with God that maybe he had become to develop in those years? What propelled him to leave Nazareth and head out into the desert and to the Jordan River to meet John? Maybe there was some kind of vision involved there. But what we do know is that there were visions that Joseph, his father, and Mary received, and that they believed them. They most undoubtedly would shared those with him. A mystical experience is the voice at his baptism. "You are my son," the voice says. In some cases, everybody hears it. In some cases of the Gospels, only Jesus hears it, but obviously told his disciples about it. The Spirit, it says, took him into the desert. And the desert's a great place for mystics, where they feel civilization and all the distractions are stripped away, and one can find closer unity to God. In fact, some of the earliest Christians, when they got the deepest into their faith, fled the cities and went out into the desert. The Dead Sea Scrolls are a Jewish example of a community that left to find some kind of purity in the desert where God could be more apparent. Others through human history, or through Christian history, have decided to sit on top of poles for the rest of their lives, the stylites they were called. Others have found caves, the hermits. Monasticism, of course, lends itself to a mystical relationship with God, where God is pretty much all you focus on, and you value and make yourself open to that. He says when he shares the words of Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," and that is key in mysticism, is a sense of the Spirit. He spends a lot of time in prayer, another practice known to be part of the mystic life, maybe more so than the life of someone who's working in the name of Christ, or those who consider their work to be in communion in prayer with Christ. And he talks to the disciples when they return with all that excitement from healing people on their trip, and he says, "I watched Satan fall from heaven." So this Jesus is having these mystical experiences, of which we can have no doubt as he shares those, and as he seems to be someone utterly different than everyone else, one who can say, "I and the Father are one," or "I'm the vine and he's the vine dresser." He appears to his disciples entirely different in the Transfiguration. That communion with God is so powerful at that moment that he glows. He shows it in his physical appearance. His closeness to God indicates a constant communion with God, especially in the Gospel of John. The Son does what he sees the Father doing. Okay? And he speaks to the Father. "Father, our time has come." Our time has come. He speaks intimately, and mystics become often very intimate with God in ways we might not even necessarily feel comfortable with. He calls him, "Hey, Daddy, this cup, could you remove this for me? I don't know if I can drink it." Mystics often have, over Christian history, fallen, what we could say is, in romantic love with God. And oftentimes we'll see in our songs today, especially our modern praise songs, a lot of that of just unadulterated love, and that comes out of the mystic realm, and certainly would reinforce Jesus' ethic of love. A mystic who experiences God as love wants to love others in the same way, and wants others to love each other. We can also see then, at the same time, something that's not opposite by any means, but something that's less emotional and perhaps more located in the form of wisdom. He's seen as a wise person. a wise person. And there's some startled responses by Pharisees, like, where did he get this stuff from? How does he know so much? I've been reading a little bit about what could have been Jesus's earthly education. I know a lot of people would say, don't worry about his earthly education. He's God's son. It's all being like downloaded into him, and he knows it all because of that. Well, okay, but what would his earthly education look like? Well, it wouldn't look like much. Not in Nazareth. Not as far as we know. There might have been a synagogue. He may have spent a ton of time there where they would be reading, but even that synagogue was so poor, they're wondering how many scrolls it could have had. In other words, did Jesus have access to the whole Bible in written form? Fascinating thoughts. But he was wise, and wise in the tradition that we see Solomon, for example, exhibiting in the book of Proverbs. Pithy, short sayings that are memorable, that are extraordinary, sometimes echoing Old Testament and sometimes bringing something brand new in. Scholars tell us that there were other such rabbis, although many are dated to the 2nd and 3rd century. So in this way, maybe Jesus is a little bit on his own, acting in this way as a wise soothsayer, or maybe he set the stage for that to follow. But who can forget these wise sayings and these stories that we call parables that have such power that lingers to this day? Some of the wise sayings that were, echoed throughout all the Gospels in powerful ways about if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other. Once you've heard that, whether you can do it or believe it, you can't forget it. Bang. Okay, here. I mean, it's so powerful. And from the smallest child to the wisest person, unforgettable. If someone asks for your coat, give them your shirt as well. This is such a simple saying, but what does it say? It says your generosity should know no bounds, and what's requested of you, just give it freely. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor. Who says that? Unless they can do something about it. Jesus came for the poor. He preached them good news. He expects us to do something for the poor. That's why we've been commissioned. So he says, blessed are you poor. And we are a whole different people when we remember that. Love your enemies. How much of life changes if we can do that? Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Wow. At a time when Caesar was hated almost universally, except for the few Jews who were collaborating with Caesar's power, here he is. Give him what's his. To be honest with you, what's his? Found on a coin. What's God is everything else. Just give it to him. And give God everything else. And then we look at things like the parables. Although only attested to in Luke, one has a hard time imagining the Good Samaritan being a story that is exclusive to him. It's such a powerful story. The villain of the story, in a sense, is actually the hero, the Samaritan who comes along and rescues the Jew. What about the prodigal son? What about that? The wisdom found there. And so we see in Jesus this wisdom that the Pharisees say, where does he get it from? He gets it from himself. He doesn't need to reference somebody else's because his relationship with God is so powerful. So maybe it is tied together to mysticism. His relationship with God as it leads him to a kind of life that we could call a mystical or a mystic's life, but also to one of a teacher, a wise speaker, one who's left behind words of life for us. As Peter said, where else can I go? You have the words of eternal life. Hope you enjoyed this today, and we'll see you next week.